Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Perry, and I am the parent advisor in the Philadelphia office of the Peel Center. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for our webinar, Know Your Rights, Disability Voting Rights webinar. And before we get started, I do want to let everybody know that this webinar will be recorded. And in the handout section is the PowerPoint if you would like to download it and follow along as we do this webinar. Alrighty, I think that's as far as the, yeah, that's what I wanted to get started with. I do want to let everyone know that as we go through the webinar, we do have some polling questions throughout. So before we get started with our introduction of our presenter today, I would like to post our first polling question, and hopefully on your screen you can see that question today. And we really want to know who's with us today. And we would like you to select one. Are you a youth or a young adult, self-advocate? Are you a family member, or are you a professional? And please select one, and I'll give everyone a couple minutes to fill that out. If you're just joining us, we do have a polling question up on the screen, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us who is with us today. All right, thank you. And here we are. Wonderful. So we have 73% professionals. We have 19% youth and young adult. That is awesome. And we have 8% family members. So thank you for filling that out. All righty. Again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our voting webinar. Gabe LaBella recently retired as a staff attorney at Disability Rights Pennsylvania. And prior to Disability Rights Pennsylvania, she was an attorney at the Education Law Center. In her 19 years of law practice, she focused on the legal rights of children with disabilities and was a member of the Governor's Special Education Advisory Panel, which I had the honor of serving with her. At DRP, Disability Rights Pennsylvania, Ms. LaBella was also project director for protection and advocacy for voter access, providing training, advocacy, and education to ensure full participation in the electoral process for individuals with disabilities. She was a member of the Pennsylvania Voting and Election Administration Stakeholders Work Group convened by the Department of State, and she was on the Joint State Government Commission's Advisory Committee on Aging Voting Machines. So our speaker today, our presenter, comes with a whole wealth of experience and knowledge, and a very good friend of mine. And Gabe, take it away.
Thank you, Diane, and it's been a real pleasure serving with you on SEEP as well. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is a really exciting and challenging time for all of us, considering the COVID-19 crisis and how it has impacted our election. We're going to talk about what the COVID-19, what changes have been made because of that, and just and in addition, of course, the new law that passed in Pennsylvania last winter, making dramatic changes to our election law. Next slide, please.
So, and before we, yep, this is going to be a polling question, Gabe. So I'm going to jump right in here. All righty. So we want to know, we're going to put up that polling question about, are you registered to vote? All righty. So yes, you are, or no, I am not 18 years old, or no, I am 18 or older, but not registered yet. So let's give our audience another minute or two to fill that out for us, please. Okay, the results are in, and wonderful. Look at that, Gabe.
Wow.
83% are registered to vote. We only have a small percentage that's not 18, but we do have 13% that is not registered. So I'm sure you're hopefully going to talk about that as you move along. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. That's really terrific. So you already know that there are basic requirements to vote, right? That you must be a citizen of the United States, that you must be 18 years old on or before the next election, and you must be a resident of Pennsylvania for 15 days prior to the election. So that's pretty much what's required. Now, there are federal and state laws that protect the fundamental right to vote for all Americans, right? And that includes individuals with disabilities. The federal laws that we have are the Help America Vote Act, which was passed in 2002, and it's a really important law because it was the first time that individuals with disabilities were given the legal right to vote privately and independently. And of course, HAVA, which is, you'll hear that term a lot, it did make the voting process more inclusive and accessible. For example, HAVA required that every polling place have at least one accessible voting system. Now, the National Voter Registration Act, which was in 1993, established the right to vote at any government agency that provides services to people with disabilities, such as I'm sorry, I thought I had the list, but lots of government agencies like the public libraries, which are more of state agencies, to Department of Public Welfare, which is Department of Health and Human Services now, and other government offices have the obligation to help individuals register. Now, the American with Disabilities Act, which passed in 1990, you're all aware of, I'm sure, in terms of all of the benefits it provided. In terms of, this focuses more on voting, but as you know, it makes it illegal for the government to discriminate against people with disabilities. So Title II requires states and counties to provide reasonable accommodations and modifications to the voting process itself. And we'll talk more about that later. Then there's the Voting Accessibility for Elderly and Handicapped Act of 1984. And it says that polling places must be accessible to senior citizens and people with disabilities. If they are not, you must be offered an alternative means of voting. The National Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was amended in 1982, states that you do have the right to choose a person to support you. That means anybody, so that if you need help, you can ask anyone. The only person you cannot ask is the judge of election, your boss, your employer, or your labor union representative. It also says that states can't make voters pass reading tests before letting them vote. Now, state laws. Election law is traditionally a state's responsibility, and states do have the power to regulate election issues in areas where Congress has not preempted the field. Now, Pennsylvania election laws. Now, Pennsylvania election laws are codified in the Pennsylvania Election Code, which was enacted in 1938. On October 31st, 2019, Governor Wolf signed a new law, which is Act 77 of 2019. And it really did make the most significant updates to our election laws in more than 80 years. Disability Rights Pennsylvania and other voter advocacy groups worked very closely with the Department of State around Act 77 of 2019. Some of the highlights are it allows no excuse mail-in voting, which we'll talk about that. But it is really the one issue that we had been advocating for several years with the Department of State. It set a 50-day mail-in voting period, which is terrific because that means that up to 50 days before the election, you can request the mail-in ballot, you can fill it out and send it back. So it gives lots of time for you to do that, and we certainly encourage you to do that as early as you can. It's not going to make a lot of difference now because we're running very close to the June 2nd election. It extends voter registration time from 30 days to 15 days. It also changed the mail-in and absentee submission deadlines, which we'll talk about and give you those deadlines. The other big change is it eliminates straight party ticket voting. And I'm sure you all know what that is, right? But that's where, in Pennsylvania, we were able to go into the polling booth and just push one button and you voted a straight, let's say, Republican ticket or Democratic ticket. That's no longer an option. So now you really have to pick each candidate individually. Act 77 also authorized 90 million bond for voting systems. And as you know, Pennsylvania required that all counties purchase new voting systems. I'm sorry, and which are quite expensive, and counties certainly didn't have the resources to purchase them. So the Act 2019 did authorize 90 million so that counties had the support they needed to purchase new voting system. It also established a permanent mail-in and absentee ballot list so that an individual who decides that they really always want to vote by mail, they can just get put on a permanent list. So they don't have to apply every year. Voter registration or change of address. You can do all that online at www.votespa.com. You can do it at social service agencies, government agencies, county election offices, which I have the link here for you, but let me go back to votespa.com, which is a comprehensive website by the Pennsylvania Department of State where you can, and it's been updated extensively the last few years. It's very user-friendly, and you can go on Votes PA to get lots of information from county election offices, and it'll give you contact information to current voting information, the status of your application, and so on. Again, we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. And of course, the Department of Motor Vehicles, right? The voter motor laws, where individuals who go and apply for a license can say yes and automatically register to vote. So if you register to vote, which you could do online or print an application and mail it in, it's really important that you check your registration status, which again, you can do on Votes PA, and we gave you the link. You can update your voter registration with a new address. You can find out where your polling place is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but given the fact that we have a different there's a new date for the election, and that was changed by law because they can't just change an election date without it being a legal change. So that was called Act 12 of 2020. And that's, the main thing you heard about that was when the governor announced that the election would be on June 2nd. However, Act 12 did a few other fixes to the Act 77. And one of the things that it did is because of the pandemic, it did permit counties to consolidate polling places, right, from 2 into 1. So it is really important that you go on the PA Votes website and check where your polling place is, or contact your county office, election office, to see if your polling place has been changed. You're supposed to get notified by your county of any changes, but just to be sure, I would suggest that you check it out on the Votes PA website or on your county website, or call them. You should find out if your polling place is accessible. Again, that information should be on the websites. Department of State also has information on polling places, and you can find out about accessibility. If you need an accessible site, I would also suggest that once you know where your polling place is, go by there and see if it's accessible, at least from the parking lot, are there enough parking spaces? Can you get into the polling place? Now, you won't be able to go inside to see if it's accessible, but at least you can check it out. And you could call your county to find out about accessibility of that specific polling place.
And Gabe, I hate to interrupt you. I'm just going to mention, I forgot to mention to all our participants today that if they have any questions throughout, please put them in the question box. And we have people that are responding to those questions. And Gabe, if there is any questions we need to ask you, we will bring them to your attention as well.
Oh, great, thanks. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. I don't mind, really.
All right, great, thank you.
Better than waiting till the end if you have a question right on that specific issue that I'm talking about. So mail-in ballots, which is really the most significant change for us, those of us in the disability community. Vote by mail makes it really convenient to vote. And it doesn't require jumping through hoops to prove that, as you would have to do with an absentee ballot. So it gives you a much more convenient way to participate. And individuals who can't go to the polls, where it's inconvenient to go to the polls for lots of reasons, it gives them a wonderful option to still vote. There are 2 ways to vote. You can either choose a mail-in ballot or, if eligible, an absentee ballot. You complete those forms and you return them to your county election office. You can also apply online, and we'll talk more specifically about some of the issues with the mail-in ballot. So an absentee ballot. You're eligible for an absentee ballot. And by the way, this has always been written into the law that we had, the Pennsylvania Election Code, that this was all we had until this latest mail-in ballot. All that was available in Pennsylvania is that if you were going to be out of the municipality on election day, or if you have a disability or an illness that makes you unable to go to your polling place and vote, then you could request an absentee ballot. However, the absentee ballot does require you not only to list the reason for the request for the ballot. For a person with a disability, they require medical verification. Now, the mail-in ballot, the only requirement is that you are a qualified voter. If you're a qualified voter, you can apply for a mail-in ballot. All you have to do is request a ballot, and you don't need a reason. For individuals who in the past have requested absentee ballots, there's no reason to do that because you could request a mail-in ballot. Absentee ballots are still something you want to know about if you missed the deadline to request a mail-in ballot, so that if the Tuesday before the election at 5 you haven't requested a mail-in ballot, then you would need to request an absentee ballot. Then there's an emergency absentee ballot, which is a ballot that you would request, and there's a special procedure for that ballot. That would be for an illness that occurs the Friday, but after Friday at 5 before the election. For example, if a person has to be hospitalized on the Saturday before the election, they can apply for an emergency absentee ballot. And you can get all the information on how to do that on Votes PA. It has been modified under Act 77, so you no longer need to go to the courts to get approval, but it's still a process. So I want to stress, because there is confusion around individuals who are eligible for absentee ballots, you know, whether or not they have to use that versus a mail-in ballot. Act 77 said that if you were eligible for an absentee ballot, you couldn't file a mail-in ballot. That is no longer the case. Act 12, which changed the election date to June 2nd, also changed the definition of mail-in ballot, which is anybody, as long as you're a qualified voter, you can apply for a mail-in ballot. I will tell you that the mail-in ballot application, the one that's online, if you've requested it online, asks you questions such as, are you applying because you're an overseas voter or veteran, or yes, no? Are you applying because you're going to be out of the municipality or have a disability? Yes, no. If you've encountered that, and they haven't made the change yet, I just checked this morning, the online mail-in ballot is still asking those questions. So be sure to just say no and apply for a mail-in ballot. If you say yes, that you're applying because you have a disability, it's going to redirect you to the absentee ballot, which is incorrect and unlawful. Everybody is permitted to vote by a mail-in ballot regardless, as long as you're a qualified voter. So be careful if you're applying online, because the Department of State hasn't made the change on the online application. The mail-in application does not ask those questions, so that's fine. You just fill that out. So as long as you're registered to vote, you can apply for a mail-in ballot. And I will mention that over 1 million people have applied for a mail-in ballot for this specific election. Again, before you apply, make sure, check your registration status and make sure everything's in order. But I strongly urge, I know all of you are registered to vote, and I don't know if you've applied for a mail-in ballot, but I strongly encourage you to do that if you're not comfortable going out because of the pandemic. Make sure you check your registration status so that there's no issue in your application. So, in order now to do it online, to request a ballot online, you do have to have either a driver license or a pen.id. There's no other way to register online currently. That hopefully will change in the future, but currently you need either a driver license or a pen.id number. If you don't have a driver license or a pen.id number, you can download the paper application and then mail it to the local county board of elections. You can also go to your local county board of elections to request the application, and under Act 77, you could you could fill it out right there. They can give you your ballot, and you could potentially just fill out the ballot and give it back to them, so you're done.
Gabe?
Yeah.
There are a couple questions coming in. Is this a good time?
Sure.
Okay. The one question slash comment says, wouldn't it just be easier to vote online?
Well, that's a whole other complicated issue because of security issues, okay? And Pennsylvania I don't believe we'll entertain that notion. That would be a major, change in the law. Voting online is really complex, and some states have done it, but it took a lot of years to even get online voter registration. And now that we have, mail-in voting was a huge issue, and we got mail-in voting. I don't think myself will get online voting. I mean, there's still objection by certain individuals who didn't want online mail-in ballots.
Okay.
They
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the next, there's two others. There is talk of a lack of funding for the United States Postal Service. How will this affect a mail-in ballot?
Yeah, that's an issue, right? That's always been discussed. And there's currently a lawsuit that was filed because in order for your application to be counted, for your vote to be counted, they have to have received it by by 8 p.m. on June 2nd, right, on election. So, with the post office issues, they might get them late, or they have to receive them by the mail or in person, right? So if you have a mail-in ballot and it's election day, you can bring it to your election office or to your polling place if you haven't mailed it in, or if you don't think it'll get in on time. There is right now legislation that was filed by the PILC, the Public Interest Law. The main plaintiff is Disability Rights Pennsylvania and a bunch of other organizations, and they specifically are asking that they count the mail-in applications that are received within, and I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number, within a number of days after June 2nd, okay? And they have also filed for a preliminary injunction. So hopefully that will have positive results.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
All right.
because that was always a discussion, even in the stakeholder group that we had, because it's even separate from a funding issues. You can't guarantee if you mail something to the post office that it's going to get, let's say you mail it Friday, there's no guarantee that they'll have it by Tuesday, right? Or, it's the good thing is that it's being looked at, and there are groups that are filing lawsuits in order to extend that.
Right.
So keep an eye on the newspapers or on the website of the Public Interest Law Center. And actually, I looked online this morning, and they do have a summary of the case on their website. So keep an eye on that to give you an idea. But I'm sure if they're successful in getting the PI, they'll be issuing a press release, and you'll hear about the fact that they will accept return voter absentee mail-in ballots after June 2nd.
Okay, great. And can a mail-in ballot be hand delivered to the county board?
Yeah, certainly, by the person though. And there's also another lawsuit that is requesting that they have that that a third party be able to hand in that ballot.
Lots of lawsuits around this, huh?
Huh?
It sounds like there's a lot of lawsuits out there around all this voting.
It's, yeah. And it's a good thing, right? Because the disability community is well organized and is strong and is on top of this. So it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will say that, the emergency absentee ballot for people that are physically, unable to go to their polling place, there's a whole process where you designate somebody to be your representative who will bring it. But that's not in place for general absentee ballots or mail-in at this point.
Okay. And is there assurance that no ballots mailed in will be missed or misplaced?
What do you mean? You know, they had to have security protocols in place. Okay, so I don't think that's an issue. I have been seeing a lot of stuff on social media about that, that people, you know, mail their ballots in and they're thrown in the trash. That's not correct. There's a whole protocol for that. And counties have a responsibility to assure, legal responsibility to assure that every vote is counted. And I think that's more of, you know, I don't believe that's correct.
Thank you. It's good to know that there is that security piece in place as soon
Absolutely.
as they receive it. So that should be you know, good for people to know that. So, okay, you can get back to your PowerPoint.
So to finish up, so your completed application for a ballot, okay, is 5 p.m. May 26, 2020. Okay, that's what I'm saying. And I believe that, you know, and that's why that if you then have an emergency after May 26, you want to look and you'd have to apply for an absentee ballot. But up until May 26, 2020, you could just routinely just apply for a mail-in ballot. Once you receive it, follow the instructions carefully and mail in the ballot by 8 p.m. They have to receive it by 8 p.m. June 2nd, 2020. By the way, the other change that was made in the fix is that, you know, because they have to start counting ballots when the polls close. And one of the fixes is that counties can start counting absentee or mail-in ballots that morning of June 2nd, as opposed to waiting till 8 p.m. Next slide. So in-person voting is still a big issue, right? So just overall, right? You have a right to vote by yourself and you make your own choices. You have a right to get help from a person of your choice and to vote at a physically accessible polling place and to use an accessible voting machine. Physical access. We're all aware of that, right? And we talked about that under the ADA. You have a right to an accessible polling place. You know, if voters who use wheelchairs, have other mobility issues, should have the ability to enter a polling place as everyone else, right? To be able to travel to the voting area, to make sure that if they're driving to a polling area, that there's appropriate parking, that there is the appropriate number of handicap parking, and that it's in such a way that the person, again, can move within the voting area, whether it's inside or outside, independently and easily. There are comprehensive guidelines relating to polling place accessibilities, and you could take a look at them on ada.gov. It's a very thick packet, which tells you it's very well done, and it gives you lots of specifics. So if you have issues at your polling place around accessibility, take a look at the ADA polling place accessibility manual, because, and again, you know, it would be great if you could print those pages and bring it to your election office, to your county election office, and tell them that you want an accessible polling place. Next slide. So accessibility of voting systems. We talk about HAVA, right? That required that there has to be one accessible voting system at all voting, at least one system at each polling place, right? And it includes, you know, adaptations to the voting systems, right? For individuals with mobility issues and for those who are blind or have other visual disabilities. The issue, and I mentioned it before, and I'm going to keep saying it, right? That every person, regardless of disability, should have and has the legal right to have the opportunity to vote independently and privately. So What that means, and I say this at the end, but I'm going to repeat it, right? That you have a right to mark, verify, and cast the ballot privately and independently, and in that order, right? So in the discussions around new voting systems that I was involved in, both at the state level and among voting advocacy groups, is that it's not good enough that a person with a disability can just mark it. They need to be able to verify it as well before they cast it. And that's been a big issue in terms of the new systems. So keep that in mind when you go to your polling place, that you should be able to mark the ballot, to be able to verify that what you marked is what you intended, and then to cast your vote. Poll workers should be trained and knowledgeable in the use of accessible features and should make sure that they're fully operational when the polls open. Again, if you've had negative experience about that, you ought to communicate with your county election officials, because a lot of times the accessible machine isn't even plugged in until a voter comes in who needs it, and that's not okay. We know that there are poll workers who don't even know how to use the new system or their existing voting machines. So now that most counties have new voting systems, it's crucial that the poll workers have the appropriate training and knowledge so that they can assist individuals who need to use the accessibility features. Next slide. Voting competence. That's easy, right? There are no voting competence laws in Pennsylvania. An election official cannot bar a person from exercising their right to vote because they deem that a person doesn't comprehend the vote or understand the ballot. They can't question the ability of a voter, whether the voter has an intellectual disability, mental illness, brain injury, dementia, and other cognitive limits. And certainly, they can't bar them from exercising their right to vote. I will tell you that there are states that do have some requirements. We're fortunate in Pennsylvania that we do not. So keep that in mind if anyone ever questions a person's ability to vote, to make a judgment as to voting. Not okay. Communication access is also important, right? That they're required to provide sample ballots in alternative formats. There should be instructions at a polling place that can be understood by individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing, and these are just suggestions, right? Because there could be dozens of communication access issues depending on what the person's needs are. But, a simple one is having pen and paper available at a check-in table so that a worker could communicate with individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing about routine matters. If the individual who is deaf, for example, has more complex matters that the person needs to communicate, then there should be deaf interpreter somewhere within that county that they can rely on so that this individual is able to vote like everyone else. Next slide. Other accommodations, and again, there could be many accommodations that legally need to be made, and a good example is service animals, okay? They're permitted to come into the polling place and to the area where you vote, period, right? Having chairs available for individuals that they can't stand if there's a line. Having a process where individuals with disabilities who can't stay in line a long time, whether seated or not, that they get priority in voting. Again, and this right, that a person with a disability who has, manual dexterity issues is permitted to mark, to make a mark instead of signing their names, and then permitting others to sign their names. Assistance with voting. Again, you have a right to get help from a person of your choice. You do have to sign a declaration of need of assistance. And the form just is very basic. You know, you have the person who's helping you has to put their name and address. If you see a form that asks what the disability is, you know, you don't, in my opinion, that is intrusive. And I think that you could just check yes, you know. You don't have to say what it is. A lot of times you see the forms and they'll say disability and there'll be a line next to it. And I've raised that issue because that line has one thinking that they have to list what the disability is. And I would suggest, regardless, if there's a line where, you know, that's long enough that you think you ought to be listing the disability, just put a check mark there. Again, you can't, anybody can help you. But the judge of elections, your union rep, or your boss cannot help you, cannot be the person that gives you the support. Otherwise, it could be anyone, even a poll worker, if you don't have anyone with you, okay?
Question, Gabe.
Yeah.
On the assistance, do they have, I'm assuming they have to have those forms, the Declaration of Need of Assistance form,
Yes.
available right there that day?
Yes, they do.
And if someone had assistance and didn't fill out that form, is that a problem? For example, you know, me helping my son go to vote, and I help him, but I never knew I had to fill out a form and they never said anything.
It's okay. Some places don't ask. In fact, you know, I've worked hotlines where people will call in a panic saying they're asking me to sign a form. And I say, yep, that's okay. So remember, there are 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and each county has a lot of procedures, has a lot of their own procedures. They have to have procedures that are in compliance with the Pennsylvania Election Code, but they have, you know, a lot of them do their own thing. And there are counties that haven't asked that question, and that's okay. Assistance means, you know, you go into that polling booth, close the curtain, and you help the person. So that's okay. That, okay? So
all right.
If they don't ask you to fill the form, you don't fill the form.
All right, 2 other questions. Can individuals bring in a cheat sheet that they work through to remember the names and the candidates?
Yeah, anybody can, right? You've been to the polling place where, you know, the Republicans and the Democrats stand there and give you sample ballots of who they want you to vote for. Yeah, you could bring that with you.
Okay, very good. And one last question. It says, my father is visually impaired. He went to vote and my mother was going to help him vote, but they would not allow her. They said that the election staff, would help him. Is that allowed?
No, it's not. I mean, they could, but that's wrong. He has a right to have help from anybody he wants, and he wants his spouse. In those cases, you know, they should object and say, that's not legally, I have a right to bring anybody I want. If the poll worker says that, and then I would ask to speak with the judge of elections, because each polling place has a judge of election there. And then we're going to give you some phone numbers that you could call if it's a problem, but I certainly would not agree to have them help me. And that system ought to be accessible to the person who's blind, right? So that the person can put on headphones, and the machines are accessible to individuals that they have the audio component. But yeah, anybody can ask for support, even if they're able to use an accessible system that's audio for a person that's blind. If that person feels they need support, then they're entitled to support.
Thank you.
ID at the polls. Again, in Pennsylvania, you're not required to show ID in order to vote, period. However, if you're a first-time voter, you have to show ID, or if you moved and you're a first-time voter in that particular polling place, you have to show ID. Otherwise, you do not. And I will tell you that there are still some poll workers who think that people have to show ID. And that is just unlawful, wrong, and don't do it. You know, it's interesting because that issue was resolved legally several years ago when they tried to pass a law that required voter ID, which was defeated. And so, you know, if you go to your polling place and you're asked to show ID and you're not a first-time voter and you're not voting at a new polling place, you refuse to show ID, period. And again, if they are insisting that you show ID, ask for the judge of elections and then go up the ladder, but we'll give you some phone numbers that you can call. So you can also, and those are examples, by the way, of what ID is included, and it could be lots of different things. So again, you shouldn't be asked for a specific ID. There's lots of ways that you can show that. Next slide. So April 28th, the Department of State required that all voting systems in Pennsylvania have a paper trail. And that's important, right? Because that's the only way you can be sure that those ballots not only can be audited, but they can verify that they're accurate. And you'd be surprised, there are many, many counties in Pennsylvania who didn't have a voting machine that had a paper record. Now, 67 counties, which is how many counties we have in Pennsylvania, have selected voting systems. 45 of them have used the new voting systems in the general election in 2019. Some additional ones will also be using it for the primary, but there are still some counties that are not going to be using their new systems June 2nd. So you really need to check your county website, which will have information about new voting systems, what they are, and so on. You can also go on Votes PA and get information. Specifically, they have every county listed and what systems they've selected. And then you can also, you know, click on that system and learn how to operate it, because it's going to be a new experience for everyone. So it's a good idea to become familiar with what voting system you're going to be using if you're going to be voting in person. Oh, I jumped ahead of myself, right? So again, you know, contact your county election office, look on your county election website to see what system they've chosen. Many counties, by the way, had like demonstrations for people of different systems before they picked them. And in fact, you can check with your county, see if they have a system either at the county office or somewhere that you can go and test and see how it works before the election. Election. Oops.
Hey, we're going to have a poll, but before we get to the polling, before we get to the poll question, let me give you a couple other questions here.
Sure.
Somebody wanted to know, do the new machines give you a receipt of your voting ballot?
No, not that. But the new machines have to show you after you pick, you're able to verify it, right? So some systems are like standalone, like Philly picked one that's the XL, right? So it's like, it's similar to what they had, but it has, so you vote on it and then it'll show you on a side screen your selections, which will then come out and then they get fed into, I believe, that same machine. There's so many different systems, but you'll be able to see what you picked. And for individuals who are doing the audio. There are lots of issues around that, but the systems are able to read back what you picked. It gets complicated, but you need to be able to verify your vote before you cast it.
Okay.
Those systems, then there, and then there are systems that have like what they're called BMDs, ballot marking devices, which is, a screen where you make your selection and then it prints out your ballot and you have to then go over to a scanner. So it's like different steps. That's why it's important for you to find out what system your county is using.
Okay. And I apologize, this was a question from before. Is there a time limit to the assistance form? In having to refill it, like does it have to be refilled out every 5 years? Somebody had asked.
No, I think you have to do it each time.
Okay. All right.
Because you could be bringing different people, you know what I mean? The request for assistance form is really who's with you that day, okay?
Okay. And one last question until we do the polling question is the declaration of need for assistance form mandatory?
Well, yes, it says that you're required to fill it out in the statute, but like I said, if a county doesn't ask you, I mean, you can ask them, don't I need to fill out a form? But if they don't require it, I wouldn't worry about it. But yes, it's in the law.
Okay, thank you. All right, Kala, do you want to take us to our next polling question? Have you ever had a problem on election day? And please select all that apply. No. Yes, with accessibility of the voting system. Yes, with physical access. Yes, with questioning your right to vote. And yes, with other accommodations needed. So please take a minute or two to fill out your selection, please. All right, a couple more seconds there. And our results are in. Wow.
Wow, that's
Look
pretty
at that.
impressive, guys.
Yes.
I do see 5% individuals with questioning your right to vote.
Yeah.
Is it possible to hear from that person to see was that person that got resolved, or that's really concerning, that.
So if whoever wrote, whoever did that, if they want to put a, if they want to identify themselves, they can put
exactly.
that
They don't have to. It's
into the
totally
question box, and I can bring
Yeah.
that information to you. Okay.
Yeah.
Or you can raise your hand. There's a way that you can raise your hand too, and we can call on you, whichever option that person feels like, if they want to.
So election complaints. The Department of State, as we've mentioned, oversees elections in PA, right? And it's their job to make sure elections are fair and honest. And if you have issues on election day or any issue related to your voting rights, you're free to file a complaint. And they have two kinds of complaints that you could file, right? One is for HAVA violations, which are, for example, if you weren't able to vote privately and independently, right? And specific issues around your voting. And then general problems, for example, if you have accessibility issues, if somebody, there we go, somebody questions your ability, whether or not you have the ability to vote. Any of those issues, you file a general complaint. And again, you could do that right on Votes PA. Or you could call Disability Rights Pennsylvania, and you can call their intake system. I didn't put it in. I probably should have, But in any event, you can just go on their website, disabilityrightspennsylvania.org, and there is a section there for intake. You can call and speak to someone about filing a complaint if you feel that your rights have been violated, or you can file a complaint on your own on the Votes PA website.
So,
and by the way, you can also, you can always call Votes PA for information or any other issues that you may have. Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
no, I'm sorry. Gabe, so it was our good friend Saber Townsend, and she shared that somebody questioned her son when she took him to go vote, but it did get resolved when they spoke to the voting commissioner, right? Or the what's the correct name?
Yeah, and
the
that's
judge
great.
of elections. She helped him speak with the judge of elections, and everything was resolved.
That's great. And I will say, Saber, it's good to know you're here. That's wonderful that that your son was able to self-advocate with the judge of election. I will also say that, those of you who are working with clients who have these issues, I would also suggest, and it doesn't have to be on election day, that you then contact the election office and tell them that they need to train their poll workers to not ask those questions across the board, so that you use it as an opportunity to advocate for everybody in that particular in that particular county. But I think it's wonderful that individuals with disabilities advocate for themselves at the polling place. Great work, Sabra.
Mm-hmm. And one other question before we move into one more slide. I know we're getting close in our time here too. Are we not using paper ballots this year? Our last elections, we had paper ballots, and once completed the ballot, and then it was put into a machine. Is this changing?
That's as I said, though, there are 67 counties, and 67 counties all are going to do it differently. So if your county had paper ballots, I don't see why they wouldn't do it differently, but you may want to check the website to see if they have a new system or if that was the new system.
Thank you.
A lot of counties were being pressured to have hand-marked paper ballots, which we opposed when I was at DRP, because it's going backwards rather than forwards. What we want are accessible systems, across the board, and hand-marked paper ballots, again, put individuals with disabilities in a separate category, right? Because those individuals would have to vote on an accessible system. So, off in a corner while everybody else votes by marking a ballot, not to mention the difficulty we heard from individuals that are elderly whose hands shake, and there are lots of issues with that. I will say that ideally what I believe, and others in the advocacy community, is that everybody should be voting on the same system. And that every system, not that every machine at that polling place needs to have all the accessible features, which are more expensive to place on those systems, but that there is no reason why everybody shouldn't vote on the same system. And hand-marked paper ballots, in and of themselves, put individuals with disabilities, separate them just by the nature of the process. We have one last slide, and I'll go over by 1 minute maybe, but Election Protection Hotline, which is run by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, that's probably your best option because they have been doing it for years. They're excellent. And then you have the Pennsylvania Department of State, the Votes PA hotline. I want to mention that the thing with the Election Protection Hotline is that they do record issues, but they're usually, not in a position to immediately resolve an issue other than just give you information. Disability Rights Pennsylvania ran a hotline, and I always ran it. I'm not sure if that's going to be available. I believe it probably will be, but if it is, go on DRP's website and get the number, because when we ran the hotline, if people called with issues, we were able to like contact that election, that particular county immediately and resolve it. But I know the Pennsylvania Department of State, I know they've been really busy election days, but they also can resolve problems right away. And I want to say, if you know, election protection, again, you know, is your sure bet to report those issues, because they do an excellent job of really giving information and then resolving issues for lots of different individuals. Also, when you check on Votes PA website, and you really, when you go to the polling place, you really can download your county contact information, because there'll be numbers there that you can call if you're at your polling place and there are issues. So there are options that you have on election day. And particularly, I do want to mention that in case, you know, just this is the COVID issue. If I have 2 minutes of your time, that one of the things that, as you've read, right, that the federal government passed the CARES Act, and Pennsylvania got money from the CARES Act, and they're going to be using some of that so that counties have been able to send information, mailings, so that they've been able to purchase equipment and protective supplies, and also to push, you know, mail-in voting. Also, the Department of State is procuring precinct infection protection kits, so poll workers can maintain a safe voting environment at polling locations for the June 2nd, okay? And the test kits will include masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, floor marking tape, and other sanitizing supplies, and are going to be provided to counties at no cost. So I wish you all well. Please vote and stay safe.
And we have one last polling question for everybody, if you want to pull that up for us, Calla. All righty. Are you going to vote in the June primary election? Please select one. Yes, in person. Yes, by mail-in ballot. You're not sure? No. Or I will encourage my youth or young adult, those I work with too. Please take a minute to fill that out.
Fabulous. 50% are voting by mail. Excellent. And all of the in-person voters, if you decide to vote by mail, fill out the application, send it in as soon as possible, because apparently, as I mentioned, there are over 1 million applications that have come in, and there is a big backlog. So the sooner you send it in, the better it is.
We want to thank everybody. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's it.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, we want to thank everybody for participating today. And Gabe, you got some nice comments in the chat box, thanking you for your time as well. And everybody be safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.